Once again, this is Ryan Paulson, the Rooster of Tucson, here to wake you up to the issues shaping our neighborhoods, strengthening our communities, and reminding everyday citizens that their voice still matters. Broadcasting live here from Hack Studios here in Tucson, Arizona, aka Cartel Hell. Once again, I'm Ryan Paulson, and this is the Citizen Soldier Podcast. Once again, welcome to the Iron Voice Society press briefing. Once again, this is season 2.0. We're kicking off a whole new season right here of the Citizen Soldier Podcast. And we're going to go ahead and start with the weekly situation report. Once again, good evening, Tucson. I hope you're having a good week. And if you're listening on your way home from work, from the gym, or maybe just relaxing around the house, I appreciate you spending a little bit of your day with me. And this is something new for the Citizen Soldier Podcast. And honestly, I think it's something our community has needed for a long time. Every Wednesday, we're going to slow things down a little bit and take a serious look at what's happening right here in Tucson and across southern Arizona. And not just read headlines, not just repeat what everybody else out there is saying, but actually talk about why these stories matter to everyday people. Because local news matters, my friends. The decisions being made at City Hall, the crimes happening in our neighborhoods, the challenges facing our first responders, the stories affecting our schools and our businesses, our transportation systems, those stories affect us far more than most of the national news dominating television every night. This is our city. These are our streets, and these are our neighborhoods. And that's exactly why the Iron Voice Society press briefing exists. To encourage people to stay informed, to ask questions, and to pay attention. And to remember that every strong community starts with citizens who refuse to look the other way. And our top story this week takes us to the streets of Tucson. That's right, where negotiations between the Sun Tran and the Teamsters Local 104 continue. They're still butting heads, for several weeks now. Thousands of Tucson residents has been wondering whether the bus services are going to come to a halt. Drivers voted overwhelmingly to authorize a strike if those negotiations broke down. And understandably, that got a lot of people's attention. After all, public transportation isn't a luxury for many people. It's how they get to work. It's how they get to school. It's how they make their doctor's appointments, get their groceries, how they support their families. Now, here's where the story stands today. Bus services is continuing. Negotiations are continuing. A strike has been avoided for the time being, while union members prepare to vote on the latest contract proposal. So, if you rely on Sun Tran, the buses are still running, people. That you just got to keep your head on a swivel while you're on one. But I think the bigger story isn't simply whether buses are operating tomorrow morning. I think the bigger story is, why did these negotiations become so difficult in the first place? And there's only one word, people. Safety. Because according to the local reporting out there, safety has become one of the most major issues discussed during these contract negotiations. I mean, hell, if I was a driver, looking over my shoulder 24/7, thinking that some crackhead's going to stab me, I would be on edge too. The drivers, they have voiced concerns about the conditions that they have been working under. And city leaders have acknowledged those concerns by investigating in additional security measures for the transit system, but that tells me something important. This isn't just about paychecks, people. This isn't just about schedules. This is about the people behind the wheel every single day and the passengers who depend on them. Because if drivers don't feel safe and riders don't feel safe out there, then that's a community issue. not just a transit issue. Now, if you lived in Tucson for any amount of years like I have, you've probably noticed this conversation become louder over the last couple of years. And reports of assaults, disturbances, drug activity out in the open, violence occurring on buses or around the bus stops. Those stories have become part of the discussion surrounding public transportation in our city. The bus stops have become a safe haven for drug addicts and drug activity. And some residents have become so frustrated, they've even started referring to Sun Tran as the crime bus. And it's been sticking. That's a phrase that has been used by some members of the community to express their concerns. And it reflects the level of frustration that many people feel about safety on parts of the transit system. Whether you agree with that decision or not, people, one thing is becoming increasingly clear. People want to feel safe. I mean, is it that hard? Drivers want to go home to their families after their shift. Passengers want to get to where they're going without worrying about becoming a victim. And those right there those aren't unreasonable expectations, people. They're the foundation of any successful public transportation system. And I want to keep the same mindset that I had, 10 years ago about this. You have to be armed and you have to be prepared out there, people. If you're a law-abiding citizen, you have to be protected and you have to do it yourself, okay? And one thing that I've learned over the years is that it's easy. It is easy to criticize from the outside, but it's much harder to understand what's really happening when you take the time to look beneath those headlines. And most of us has probably driven past a Sun Tran bus without giving it a second thought. We see it every day. We see the people getting on, we see the people getting off, and life goes on. But behind that steering wheel is a person who's responsible for the safety of dozens of people through the day. They're dealing with traffic, construction schedules, weather, emergencies, and people having bad days. And sometimes people experience those mental health issue crises, and they're drunk. Like I said, there's so much drama and crazy shit going on out there, Tucson. Excuse my language. But most shifts end without incident, But when something does happen, it affects everybody involved. And that's why this conversation deserves more than 30-second television sound bites out here, Tucson. All of you mainstream media bastards. And I also think that it's definitely important to remember something else. That public transportation, it exists because communities need it, okay? There are people listening to this program right now who don't own a vehicle. There's students who rely on Sun Tran to get to the classes that they need to get to. They're veterans trying to make it to their appointments to the VA. They're senior citizens trying to get back to their medical appointments, and those people are hardworking people. They have to catch that bus, and they're trying to provide for their families. And this isn't politics. It's not about social media. This is daily life for us Tucsonians. And when uncertainty enters the picture, yeah, people are going to ask questions. Will I make it to work tomorrow without being stabbed by some fentanyl zombie? Am I going to be able to get to my kids where they need to be? Should I start looking for another way around this to get to where I need to go? And those aren't abstract concerns, people. They're real. Now, let's talk about something that doesn't always get enough attention either. Doesn't get enough respect, Every person involved in this situation deserves respect. The drivers, the mechanics, the dispatch, the supervisors, passengers, the negotiators sitting there at the table trying to reach an agreement for you people. Contract negotiations are rarely easy, my friend. People have very, very difficult and different priorities. Different responsibilities and ideas about how to solve problems. But honestly, at the end of the day, folks, Everyone benefits from finding some type of common ground. Because if the buses stop, then what? Nobody wins. Drivers lose paychecks, passengers lose transportation, and businesses lose employees who can't get to work. And, the community feels that impact. And that's why I hope both sides continue talking it out, find a solution that addresses the concerns being raised while keeping this city moving. And one thing I don't ever want this program to become is a place where people rush to judgment before they know the facts. And as an independent journalist, as a content creator and a member of this community, we have a responsibility to slow the hell down. Read beyond the headlines, ask questions and listen carefully and verify that information. Because it's easy to repeat what somebody else posted online. That's easy. It's harder to take the time to confirm whether it's true. And that's what separates responsible journalism from all that noise out there. And at the Iron Boy Society Press, that's the standard I want us to uphold. And if we're going to report in our city and on our city, then let's do it professionally, accurately, and fair. And let's remember that every headline involves real people with real families. Because credibility isn't built by being first. Credibility is built by being right. And, I started the Iron Voice Society Press because I believe Tucson deserves more people paying attention. Not people looking for internet fame, not people trying to go viral or get donations, but people who genuinely care about what's happening in their neighborhoods. Because all I see right now is people out there trying to hit headlines, do the same thing, be repetitive. People willing to attend public meetings, that's what we need. People willing to document community events is what we need. And people willing to highlight both the challenges that we face and the people working every day to make this city better. And that's what being a citizen soldier means to me. It's about standing in your community, keeping your eyes open and asking thoughtful questions, and refusing to become disconnected from what's happening around you. Because change, it doesn't begin in Washington, folks. It doesn't begin on television. It begins on your street and in your neighborhoods. With citizens who dedicate themselves to paying attention, that right there is what matters the most. And before I leave you tonight, my friends, I want to challenge every one of you listening out there. Do not become complacent. The world moves fast. And sometimes all it takes is a few seconds of distraction for your life to change forever. So pay attention to what's going on around you out there. Know your surroundings and keep your head on a swivel. Look out for your family, your neighbors. And if you're legally able to do so, go buy a gun. Learn how to use it. Learn how to protect yourself and your family. And if you make that a choice, then commit to that proper training, safe handling and understanding the law. Being prepared isn't about intimidation. It's about responsibility. It's a mindset, my friends. It's understanding that while most people are good, there are individuals who look for opportunity when others aren't paying attention. So don't give them that opportunity. Stay physically strong, mentally sharp, and stay informed, my friends, because a citizen soldier doesn't wait for someone else to solve the problems. A citizen soldier takes responsibility for themselves. We stay engaged with our community and look out for the people around us. That's how strong neighborhoods are built. And that's how strong cities are built. And that's exactly what we are trying to accomplish here with the Citizen Soldier Podcast and the Iron Voice Society Press. One informed citizen can make a difference. 1,000 informed citizens can change a community. Once again, this is Scott Ryan Paulson, the Rooster of Tucson, once again reporting live here from Hack Studios in Tucson, Arizona, a.k.a. Cartel Hell. Once again, this has been the Iron Voice Society press briefing, the weekly situation report. Once again, I want to say thank you for spending part of your day with me. And until next Wednesday, stay informed, stay prepared, and stay vigilant. And keep your head on a swivel out there, Tucson, and never forget, your voice matters, your community matters, and together, informed citizens can make a difference. Once again, over and out, my friends.